Welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping Day 3 of the Women's World Championship happening in Česká Budějovice, Czechia. So hop into it, of course, with the scores from today's game, starting with the 2-0 victory for Japan over Hungary. Now, this was an interesting game where we talked about it a little bit yesterday, where it's two teams, defensively minded, not great goal-scoring teams, and that's what you get. A 2-0 game, you put in the empty net at the end. And so really it's a 1-0 game between Japan and Hungary. And I got to give Hungary credit. They played a really good game. They had the chances to win this one. They just couldn't find the back of the net. And that really was the storyline of the day for Hungary. In my eyes, they probably should have won that game. If you play that game 10 times, they might win 9 of those. But tonight, Japan was able to pull off the victory. And it wasn't exactly their best game we've seen Japan play. But they still generated the chances they needed to. They scored when they needed to, and of course they ended up on top. So they secured the 3 points. That's really all you ask for Japan. Not a great game for them, but also in Hungary's sense, they were right in it the entire way, and something to strive for and sort of build off of. Because you think what's up for Hungary from here on in for the tournament. They got a tough game against Germany and they got a tough game against Norway. We'll have to win both to avoid relegation and get into the quarterfinals. But for teams like Germany, they're going to be a tough out and they're going to play a lot more rough than, say, a Team Japan plays. So I'll be curious to see whether or not Hungary's able to build on this momentum. They are a good team. We've seen it throughout this tournament. You think about their game against Sweden yesterday. Hungary's slowly but surely building out their team. And I think once they figure out a way to put the puck in the back of the net, this is a dangerous team at this tournament just because of the way they play hockey. They stick to a good structure, very similar to Latvia this past year at the juniors, who just sort of stuck to their style of hockey. And once you stick to that style long enough, eventually it turns out. So for Hungary, I'm not too concerned. I think they'll have a tough game coming up against Germany, but at the same time, when you think about it, Hungary is up to the task. They almost beat them in the Olympic qualifiers, lost by 0.3 of a second without forcing overtime. So for Hungary, obviously looking to do something else at this tournament, trying to find ways to put the puck in the back of the net. But if they can continue to stick to their structure, you never know what's going to happen. They've kept some of the best teams in Group B close and off the scoreboard, I might add as well. So lots to build on here for Hungary, especially off this game. For Japan, one you kind of want to leave behind you. Yes, you got the 3 points so you can move onward, but one you kind of want to leave behind, refresh, try and play a game similar to the way they played against Norway. Because you think about what they got coming up. They have a tough game against a tough Swedish team as well as a German team. So that's going to be the real test for Japan at this tournament in my eyes, to see if they're able to get to that top spot in Group B and get the easier matchup in the quarterfinals, where you'll now basically, assuming nothing else goes awry in this tournament, get to play either a Czechia or a Finland. So with that in mind, I am interested to see how the rest of this tournament plays out, especially in Group B, because the interesting part is the double knockout, the double relegation spot in Group B, which we'll talk about in just a little bit here. But until then, we'll leave that for the standings discussion because I don't want to spoil too much of that. But lots in this game was a big game for Japan and for Hungary today. Japan does take it 2-0. Moving on to the second game of the day between Canada and Switzerland, and this was a game for Canada. It wasn't their best showing. They still got the win. They still got it in convincing fashion, dominated play for the entire time. And, you take the first period, you remove that, and it's a good game for Canada. And a little bit shaky in the first, a little bit shaky in the third at times. But for the most part, they played a consistent game today. Good enough to beat Switzerland. That's really all you need. But if you play like that against a team like the U.S. or a team like Czechia, who are their next two opponents, it's going to be a tough ride for Canada in this tournament. So for Canada, time to sort of leave it in the back mirror, move on here, and come to play against their next opponent is going to be the U.S. So always a tough game when you're playing the U.S., followed by another tough game on a back-to-back against the Czechs. That's one I'm going to keep an eye out for because I think it is an upset watch. Obviously, the schedule makers plan this ahead of time to try and get Canada on the back-to-back following the U.S. That might be an interesting game for the Czechs to see if they can find a way into the second spot in Group B and avoid having to play either a Sweden. Likely going to be Sweden winning the Group B, but of course that still does remain to be seen. As for the Swiss today, they played a decent game. I thought, it's a tough game whenever you're playing Canada. But they found ways to get to the middle of the ice at times, and they had some chances in this one. Desbiens was great for Canada, obviously picking up the shutout, and all 3 games today were in fact shutouts, so that's an interesting tidbit. But for Switzerland, it was a well-played game. Unfortunately, they just were on the other side of a tough team where they just got beat, and Switzerland played well enough. In my eyes, not much more they could have done. Just unfortunately came up against a tougher opponent today. So 4-0's your final in this one. Canada does take it. And we'll move on here now to the third game of the day. And this one was another one where it was, I don't know what the word is. And obviously, you have the crowd behind you playing in front of the Czech home team. And I don't know. I think for the Czechs, 5-on-5, in my eyes, they were just as good as the Americans, if not better. Their problem is that they took too many penalties. I think they took 5 penalties or 6 penalties, 3 of which got scored on. 3 of the 4 goals today were power play, or maybe the first one I think might have been taken down as a power play goal because it was a second late. But it was basically 3 power play goals today for the U.S. So 1 goal not on the power play. But for this Czech team, they have to clean it up on the discipline side, and they have to find ways to score goals. And they had plenty of chances, and Shapovalova for the Czechs today, right there, right? Lots of chances. She's been incredible for the Czechs at this tournament, just hasn't quite found the back of the net. And I think when you're looking at who they're coming up against, this Czech team, you see a game against the Finns and you see a game against Canada, and they're going to be dogfights. And I think this Czech team is a team that's ready to take on some of the bigger nations at this tournament. We saw it today. We saw glimpses of it today, I should say, against the U.S., where they were right there with them, but unfortunately couldn't find the back of the net today. They'll lose this one 4-0. As for the Americans today, they played a pretty good game, I thought. Not too many areas to poke holes with for the Americans today. They played a solid game. Didn't really drop down to the level. They controlled the play, especially in the back 2 periods. And they look good doing it. So for the Americans today, a pretty good performance. It's a tough Czech team who does really well clogging the middle of the ice. The Americans played the style perfectly. They were able to work it through and get to the middle of the ice for high-quality chances and drag them out long enough that they're almost forced penalties to take for the Czechs, where they capitalize on any opportunity. And sure enough, the U.S. today does take this one 4-0. Move on now here to the news, and we'll start here with Hungary with scoring woes. You think back to the last 2 games for Hungary, they've struggled to put the puck in the back of the net. Something to keep an eye on here, because for Hungary, obviously they had the head-in goal yesterday. At some point, they need to be able to find the back of the net. So for Hungary, especially if they want to go far in this tournament, they need to find ways to create offense. They've had plenty of high-scoring opportunities and high-quality chances. They just haven't been able to bury it. So for Hungary, be curious to see as they move along in this tournament. Obviously, 2 big games coming up, one of which is against a weaker opponent, and a game against Germany, who had a rough start to this tournament, I'll say, for Germany. Something to keep an eye on there to see if Hungary can find that spark and continue to score from there on out. As for Japan, it's not about how, but how many, and they got the 3 points today. We'll see what they can do in their next game. Obviously, you want to flush this one for Japan. Not their best performance, but definitely not their worst. We'll see what they can do in their next game. Then on to Switzerland, who was dominated today. Unfortunately, they played a good enough game, just couldn't get going playing against a tougher Canadian team. As for Canada, it was très bien for Canada today. With, of course, if you don't know, très bien is very good in French, or in Canadian French. So très bien for Canada today. Very good in net for picking up the shutout. Then on to the Czechs today with discipline problems. When you're taking penalties against a better team, they're going to bury it. You think about who they're going to have to beat at this tournament. You're looking against a tough Finn team, US and Canada, all of which have pretty good power plays. So something to keep in mind, especially as this tournament goes onwards for the Czechs, is they had some discipline issues yesterday against Switzerland, or 2 days ago rather, against Switzerland, and it was gonna be a problem for them in my eyes if they kept going at that rate. And today they just kept taking more and more penalties, and eventually it's going to end up in the back of your net. It's that classic expression: if you play with fire for long enough, you're eventually going to get burned. And today, Czechs got burned by their discipline problems. And then the last one of today is the U.S. with rolling. The U.S. right now is on a roll. We'll see if they can continue that success. Obviously, a game against Canada coming up. Always one that's circled on the calendars for both countries. We'll see which team comes to play in that one. We'll now talk about the standings, and we have two teams in first place with the U.S. and Canada, both with 6 points each, 2 regulation wins. Then the Czechs are in third place with 1 regulation win, 1 regulation loss with 3 points. Finns and Swiss are both in last place, 4th and 5th, with 2 regulation losses, no points to their record yet. Then to Group B we go, with Sweden and Japan both tied in first place with 6 points. Norway and Germany tied in third and fourth with 1 regulation loss, and then Hungary in last place with 2 regulation losses. A reminder that both teams in the bottom of Group B will be getting relegated, and then the quarterfinal format is A1 versus B3, A2 versus B2, A3 versus B1, and A4 plays A5 in the quarterfinals. So lots to play for these countries, and you want to try and avoid having to get those bottom 2 spots. So you think about who's leading the charge right now with Group B. You're looking at sort of a Sweden-Japan combo right now. Germany, in theory, could potentially get back in that race depending on their goal differential against the combined teams, and depending on how Japan does against Sweden. But you're really looking for those two, Japan and Sweden, to fight that out for that top spot. So you'd much rather play a team like the Czechs, the Finns, or the Swiss, rather than having to play against a tough team like a Canada or a USA. Always is sort of that easier matchup to get that top spot in Group B rather than having to go through one of the powerhouses. So for Sweden and Japan, lots to play for. Obviously, they got a big game coming up, something to keep an eye on there. But also in Group A, it starts to beg the question. You've seen what Sweden can do at this tournament. Would you rather be playing a team like Switzerland in that 4th spot, or would you rather be playing a team like a Sweden, where you've seen them play well at this tournament and you know that they're ready to go? Might be something to consider, especially if you're coaching the team. Now let's talk about tomorrow's games, because standings are behind. We'll stop about the tanking stuff, but just something to consider because you really never know. But tomorrow's games, 9 a.m. start here. No 3 games, only a 2-game day. We start here with Group B action between Germany and Norway at 9 a.m. This is going to be an interesting game because we saw it with Germany, obviously not to the level they were hoping for against Sweden. But I do expect Germany to play their style of hockey. And for me, I find it very difficult to bet against Germany here. I expect Germany to more or less wipe Norway. But you really don't know, because we saw Norway play a good game against Japan the other day. But it's also difficult to tell how much of that was Japan playing down to Norway or vice versa. Because we even saw it today with Japan playing Hungary, where Hungary is a little bit better and more defensively minded, where that little adjustment all of a sudden threw a wrench into Japan's ability to score. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. I expect Germany to win this one, but at the same time, Germany has disappointed me so far in this tournament, so you really never know in this one. The second game of the day at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern, is between Czechia and Finland. And I think this is a game that a lot of people have circled. Obviously, a rematch of the last few years' bronze medal game. And for the Czechs on home ice, this is a game I expect them to win. And I expect them to win it marginally too. This Finnish team isn't what it once was. We've seen it throughout this tournament. Yes, you have the quote-unquote death start with having to play Canada and then the U.S., or vice versa, rather. But at the same time, for Finland, it's a tough game against Czechia, where we've seen Finland in the past at least put a decent effort into Canada and the U.S., where they sort of give them a little bit of a scare. We haven't seen that level of scare yet at this tournament, where for the Czechs, we saw them play today against the U.S., and they had that scare. So I think really what this game is going to come down to is who makes more mistakes. Both these teams are designed to capitalize on each other's mistakes. And so we've seen it quite a bit at this tournament already, where both teams make a fair amount of mistakes. Czechs with a lot of discipline problems, Finland with a lot of turnover problems. I think it's really going to come down to which team comes to play and which team can clean up their game in the area that they need it most. Something to keep an eye on for tomorrow's game of the day, 1 o'clock between the Czechs, the home country Czechs, host Czechs, against Finland. Going to be a good one. Be sure to tune in for it. And of course, we will have the day recaps following that. But that will do it for our scheduled programming. We will now turn to live questions. If you haven't already, be sure to follow myself on Twitter at OnTheFly1515, where we post a daily poll asking for your thoughts and questions on the day for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. So we have one question today, more of a comment from Nick, the Iihf fan, who says, through 2 games, it feels like Hungary has done everything right except score. Czechia probably went to Zova today to save Peslarova for tomorrow versus Finland. Do they stick to that plan? And I have to think they would. And we talked a little bit about it earlier with the standings of would you throw this game? And I think if you see Zova in net against Finland tomorrow, they're starting to realize that you'd rather play the Swiss than you would Sweden. Sweden's an interesting team at this tournament. They're a young team. And they've shown themselves well enough, I think. I think they're one of those teams where they either play really well or they don't play well at all. So you don't want to get on the other side of that end and have a tough team to play against in a quarterfinal matchup where you have a team like Switzerland. So I think if you're the coach, it's a tough one, obviously, because you're not going to start Hazova, I don't think. I think you start Peslarova every day of the week tomorrow. But at the same time, this Czech team is one that they want to win. They want to win on home ice, and I think they're going to bring their A game tomorrow against the Finns, and I think they'll beat them pretty marginally, which in my eyes means Peslarova is going to start in net for the Czechs. But, of course, crazier things have happened. And as for Hungary, Hungary's a team that I completely agree about. You know, they've done everything right. They play a great defensive structure. All that's left for them is to score. And I think it's only a matter of time before they do finally find the back of the net. And I think that's exactly where Hungary's going to start to thrive, especially getting to play a little bit weaker opponents throughout the rest of this tournament. One notable game, of course, is Norway and then Germany. Germany is a team who, honestly, I think is going to be a tight game no matter what. I think Norway, you're going to see Hungary really open up the ice, and I think that'll be an interesting game between the two teams, where whenever you see a defensive team all of a sudden be able to take control and control the pace of play, then all of a sudden teams get opened up, and that's how a high-scoring game gets created. So for Hungary, I think they'll be okay. I think they still have to get a tough win against a German team, a good German team at that. Obviously, they're already seeking revenge after the qualifiers, but at the same time, it still is anyone's tournament in Group B. We'll see who comes out of it on top. But with that, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you like it, drop a like. If you realize you're subscribing, tell all your friends to comment down below your thoughts on Day 3 of the Women's World Championship. Until next time, see you.